My stepbrother didn't just steal a car. He tried to steal my independence and turn it into cash. My cash, my name, my future on four wheels. He did it with a pen and a smile I'd watched talk its way out of 100 small messes. My stepbrother forged my signature on the title and walked into a used car lot like he owned my life. What collapsed his plan wasn't a shout or a fist, just a folder, a calm voice, and a clerk who understood the difference between paper and proof. I laid my real documents on a DMV counter, and a stranger in a state badge made the system say what was true. To explain how I ended up arguing with paperwork, I have to go back to how our house worked. My parents split when I was 12. A year later, Mom married Mark, a good provider with a talent for not being in the room when feelings needed dealing with. With Mark came his son, Dylan, who was 15, handsome in that way that makes adults call a kid charming, and naturally fluent in the language of getting away with it. I learned early that family means different rules for people who arrive at the same table by different roads. When Dylan forgot, the world remembered for him. When I forgot, it became a lesson about responsibility. I don't hate Dylan. It would be easier if I did. Hate is a blunt tool. It makes clean decisions. What I felt growing up was more like weather pressure systems that made me brace for storms even on clear days. Dylan could borrow, return late, misplace, apologize with a story, and be handed another chance. I learned to lock my bedroom door without making a sound, to label my chargers, to write my name inside the cover of my textbooks in small letters no one else could see. The first thing I ever owned that mattered was a used hatchback I bought at 19. I worked weekends at a warehouse that smelled like cardboard and diesel, saved every spare dollar, and paid cash to a man who said reliable transportation like he was trying to believe it. It wasn't pretty. The paint had a dull ache on the hood and the radio preferred AM, but it started every morning and carried me to a life that didn't hinge on anyone's mood. Independence, it turns out, is measured in errands you don't have to ask for. The title arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. It came in one of those official envelopes with a window that makes your name look more serious than you feel. I slipped the title into a manila folder and put the folder where Mom kept important papers. A plastic bin on a high hallway shelf with birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and warranties for appliances we no longer owned. The bin was labeled I important in Sharpie, as if big letters could scare off bad ideas. I told myself the same thing we all tell ourselves before we learn better. It's safe because it's home. It would have stayed safe if I had lived alone, or if the people I lived with believed in the same borders I did. Dylan asked to borrow the car the first week I brought it home. He made it sound like a favor he was granting me by giving the car a purpose. I said no more than I said yes, and every no felt like breaking a family rule I hadn't agreed to. He had his own car off and on, but off always arrived faster than payments. He told me I should relax. I told him I like stress that starts and stops when I turn a key. 3 months before the mess, Dylan had what he called an opportunity. He wanted in on a friend's flipping business. Buy low, fix a little, sell high. He needed seed money. Mark couldn't float him because of a business slowdown. Mom hinted that brothers help each other. I told Dylan to talk to a bank. He looked at me like I'd suggested a museum. We went back to our corners and kept living under the same roof. The day the car disappeared started ordinary. I left for a morning shift, parked in the employee lot where the crows hold their own meetings, clocked in, and stacked boxes until my arms felt like borrowed equipment. At lunch, I stepped outside to eat warm noodles on a concrete bumper. I glanced at my hatchback the way you glance at a person you came with to make sure they're still there. It wasn't. I thought towed. I thought stolen by a stranger. I thought maybe I'd parked in the wrong row before coffee. I walked the lot with the slow certainty of bad news. Back row, far corner, near the busted light. No car. I called the city to check for a tow. They said no. I called the security desk. The guard checked the footage and saw nothing but a silver car leaving at 9:12 a.m. without a sound. I called insurance to file a claim. I called Mark. He said he was on a call. I called Mom. She said to check the other lot. Then, finally, I called Dylan. He answered on the third ring with that casual tone that means the situation belongs to him. Hey, what's up? Where's my car? Your car. He stretched the words into time. Why would I know? Because it's not in the lot and the camera shows it leaving, I said, measuring each word to keep them from shattering on the way out. Relax, he said, which is what people say when they want to turn your panic into your problem. It's handled. What does handled mean? It means I sold it, he said, as if he were telling me he took out the trash and wanted credit. I didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. Silence is sometimes the only way to get a thought to stand still long enough to be seen. Finally, you can't sell what you don't own. You're being dramatic, he said. It's not like I stole it. There was paperwork. Every story that goes wrong in a family has a version of that sentence. There was paperwork. He had found the bin, found the title, found the line with my name, and decided the line was an invitation. You forged my signature, I said, because sometimes the only way to control the spin of a room is to speak a correct noun into it. He exhaled like I was the one making things complicated. We sign each other's names for stuff all the time. We initial pizza boxes, I said. We don't sign away vehicles. He hung up before I could say anything else. None who don't want to hear the shape of their choices prefer dial tones to arguments. I called the dealership. After 3 transfers and one long hold music loop that sounded like an apology, a man who introduced himself as Vic, floor manager, took the call. I gave him my VIN and asked if they had purchased a silver hatchback that morning. We did, he said, like a man confirming the weather. I told him I was the owner, that the seller was my stepbrother and had no authority, that the title signature was forged. He said their paperwork was in order, that they had compared the signature to the license, that they had already resold the car to a private buyer who needed reliable transportation. He said, reliable, like he was selling me compassion instead of a problem. I asked him to read me the seller's name from the title. He read my name and said the signature matched. I told him it couldn't match, not unless my hand had learned to write while I wasn't using it. He said any issues were between you and your stepbrother and that the transaction is final. I used a voice I save for people who try to make me smaller. Here's what is going to happen next, I said. I'm going to the DMV to freeze the title. I'm filing a police report. I'm calling the state dealer licensing board. If you want to be helpful, you will call your buyer and tell him to meet us at the police station so we can unwind this before it makes his life hell. If not, he can find out the hard way what it means to drive a car with a fraud hold. He didn't like my plan, but he liked the board less. I'll see what I can do, he said. I left work early with my supervisor's face, doing that math managers do when a person's life becomes a scheduling problem. At the DMV, the line was a mural of inconvenience. Toddlers considering revolution, a teenager memorizing a manual, a woman whispering, I told him to check the headlights before the test. I asked for a supervisor and said the 4 words that get you past a counter faster than I have an appointment. There's title fraud here. The supervisor was a woman in her 50s with a name badge and a voice that answered panic without using hers. I slid my papers under the glass. My registration card, insurance card, purchase contract, and a photocopy of my driver's license. My stepbrother sold my car with a forged title, I said. I need to flag the record before a new title prints. She typed, frowned, clicked again, and then turned the screen slightly, not enough for me to read, but enough to feel like we were on the same side of the counter. I see a dealer transfer submitted this morning, she said. New title not issued yet. She opened a scanned image of the title front. Is that your signature? It was my name written by a hand that didn't know where my letters lean. No, her voice didn't change. Her words did. This is fraud, she said. She placed a small rubber stamp on a form like a priest laying down a sacrament and said the kindest sentence anyone said to me all year. We can freeze the transfer until this is resolved. She keyed in an administrative hold that acts like a glass wall, nothing passes through, and no new title prints. I'm printing an affidavit of non-consent, she continued. You'll sign it in front of our notary. It says, in plain words, I didn't sign this. No one had my permission. Take a copy for the dealer and for the buyer. Take this hold number. Bring a police report when you have it. Then she gave me the rest of the map. Call the state dealer licensing board. Give them the hold number and your case number when you get it. They take good faith very seriously. If the buyer is reasonable, meet at the police station. Don't do this in somebody's driveway. She looked up over her glasses. And don't keep your title in a hallway cabinet next time. No judgment. Just make it hard to be stupid. I signed the affidavit, held my breath through the notary's oath, and walked out with 2 extra copies because I have learned that paper behaves better in pairs. At the police station, I filled out a report under a poster that said, "Report Financial Crime," which is funny. The way falling down a flight of stairs is slapstick if you're far enough away. The officer at the window asked me questions like a man who had seen the same movie last week. Who signed? Who sold? Who got paid? I said the words out loud. Stepbrother, forged, dealer, resale, and it felt like stitching a wound that didn't want to close. While I was still at the station, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "This is Mark," the caller said, voice clipped and cautious. "I think I'd bought your car." He explained that he found my number on an insurance card in the glove compartment and that the dealership had just called to tell him there was an issue. He needed the car for work. He didn't want to be in trouble. I told him I didn't want his week ruined, but I wasn't going to let my month be ruined either. I explained the DNV hold and the affidavit. I told him if he kept driving a car with a frozen title, he could lose it later without notice. He offered to meet at the station. "I don't want anyone saying anyone did anything," he said, and the sentence made me like him. We met in the lobby under fluorescent lights that flatten everybody equally. I handed the officer my hold notice and the affidavit. Mark handed the officer his temporary tag, bill of sale, and the keys. The officer verified the VIN and made copies. The buyer brought the car back under police supervision. He looked genuinely sorry this was happening. I told him it wasn't his fault and that the dealer needed to make him whole. He said if they didn't, he'd call the board himself. I drove my car home with my hands tighter on the wheel than they needed to be, the kind of grip you use when you want to reassure an object you're not letting go. I parked 2 houses down and took photos from 3 angles, then emailed them to myself with the subject line, "It's back." Back inside, I found the bin on the hallway shelf and moved it to my room. Moving it felt like closing the barn after the horse wrote a check at the feed store, but I did it anyway. Then came the part I was dreading and owed. I called Dylan. He showed up an hour later with an expression practiced for teachers who kept kids after class. He opened with confidence. "You overreacted," he said before I said hello. The dealer had the title. I had ID. "It's not like I stole a stranger's car. Strangers have more rights in your mind than brothers," I said. "Interesting." He rolled his eyes. "It's the same household. It's not a big deal." I put the police report on the table. I put the DMV hold copy on top of it. I put the affidavit on top of that. Then I placed my driver's license next to the forgery and let the letters explain themselves. "You forged my name," I said. "That's a crime. You took my property. That's also a crime. I'm not going to pretend this is a misunderstanding because that word is for people who bump in hallways." He tried a new angle. "Pity. I needed the money," he said. "You know I've been trying to get this business going. I was going to cut you in. It was a short-term thing." "Short-term like until I needed to go to work?" I asked. "Short-term like until the buyer realized his car had a ghost for a title? The only short thing here is your patience for consequences." Mark arrived 10 minutes in, drawn by the noise as much as by Mom's text, "Come home now." He went straight to authority. "Let's all calm down." He used the tone men use when they think tone is everything. I slid the papers his way. He read, bristled, and then deflated a notch. "Dylan," he began, and there was a quiet in his voice I hadn't heard before, the quiet men have when they realize the next sentence will define them. "You can't do this." Dylan looked between us and chose defiance. "It's family." "That word doesn't mean what you think it means," I said. "Family is the reason I didn't call an attorney before I called you. Family is the reason I went to the DMV to freeze a title instead of letting a tow truck find you at lunch. But families is not a passcode to other people's property." He stared at the floor like it owed him an apology. "So what now? Now you call the dealer and tell them to return the buyer's money. Now you pay me back what I had to spend to unfry the egg. Now you stop treating the hallway cabinet like a vending machine. And now you learn what a judge's signature looks like if you don't handle this like a man who made a mistake and wants to fix it." He asked me if I would really take my own brother to court. "Stepbrother," I said, not to be cruel, but to be accurate about the math we were doing. And yes, I filed in small claims because the number fit and because I wanted a forum big enough to be real and small enough to be fast. I attached the police report, the DMV affidavit, a statement from my supervisor showing missed hours, and a screenshot of my bank app for the extra ride shares I'd had to use while the car was gone. I printed the statute the clerk had circled for me, the boring paragraph that says, "Titles require the owner's signature, that forged signatures do not magically become true, and that a transfer without consent is void." The judge listened to the quiet. He asked Dylan one question: "Did you have permission to sell the vehicle?" Dylan said no. The judge asked another: "Did you sign your stepbrother's name?" After a long pause, Dylan said yes. The judge ordered restitution. It wasn't poetic. It was numbers on a page, a deadline, and a warning about collections if the deadline passed without payment. The judge also ordered community service 20 hours at a local nonprofit that helps people keep their cars when a broken muffler threatens a paycheck. He didn't lecture, he just signed. The sound of the stamp was louder than any speech. The dealer returned the buyer's money after the buyer, to his credit, hinted at a complaint to the state licensing board and the words "pattern and practice," which no dealership wants to see in a letter with a seal. The board's investigator called me a week later to ask precise questions about how the ID was verified. I told him what Vic had told me. Glance, nod, move on. The investigator sighed the way people sigh when their job is carrying other people's avoidable weight. The dealer unwound the sale once the state got involved. Vic called me personally to say they'd tightened procedures. I told him I hoped he tightened more than procedures. At home, we changed the geography of trust. Mom cried for 2 days in that quiet way that is worse than noise. Mark apologized to me in the garage, which is where he goes to be a better man without witnesses. He said he should have locked the bin years ago. I told him locks are only part of the story. The rest is teaching people not to reach. Then I bought a fireproof safe that weighs more than a secret and bolted it to the floor of my closet. Into it went my title, the car registration, my passport, my birth certificate, and a list of who gets access to the safe me and who does not, everyone else. We put Mom's will in there too, and a photocopy of the power of attorney she'd been talking about since her sister fell and broke her hip. We moved every title and document into a safe, not a family drawer. I called the DMV to ask if they could add a note to my record requiring in-person verification for title changes. The clerk said they could flag it so no mail and transfer would pass without a counter visit. I placed a credit freeze with the 3 bureaus because one kind of fraud often introduces another at the party. I set up alerts on my bank accounts, changed passwords, and added a verbal password to the bank profile. An odd word only I would say when a rep asked, in case someone tried to call in charming. Dylan paid the first half of restitution on time and the second half late. He dropped the last envelope on the table with his mouth forming the start of "sorry." He swallowed it. Sometimes you do not get the apology you want. Sometimes you get a thin white rectangle with numbers that won't make you whole and still heal the part of your day that was bleeding. He did his community service and came home one night different. He said he spent the afternoon handing out bus passes and listening to a woman explain how losing a car cost her a job and her apartment when the commute got impossible. He looked scared in a useful way. It did not undo what he did. It did calibrate his understanding of cause and effect. I'd love to tell you we're all good now. That's not the world. We are better. We have boundaries, which are fences you build not to keep love out, but to keep it from trampling the garden. Dylan asks before he borrows anything bigger than a stapler. Mark checks with me before he adds anything to the important pile. Mom asked me to show her how the safe works, and then forgot the code, and asked again, and I showed her again. We learned that safety isn't a feeling. It's a set of habits you practice until they make a floor under your feet. If you're reading this because you saw the short version in a news clip, "Man Stops Fraudulent Car Sale," here's the longer truth from inside the room where it happened. Fraud doesn't start at a counter. It starts at home, in the lazy places where we store our lives. It starts with the sentence, "We're family," deployed by people who mean "I am entitled." It starts with a drawer anyone can open, and with our belief that good intentions are better than locks. What worked for me was not being clever. It was being boring in the right places. I brought old checks with my real signature. I brought my registration card. I brought the purchase contract. The DMV clerk didn't need a speech. She needed a comparison. She said fraud out loud and pressed a button that froze the lie before it could become a permanent record. The police officer didn't need to be a hero. He needed to make a report that gave me a case number and a way to be believed in the next room. The buyer didn't need to be an enemy. He needed a safe place to be made whole so he could walk away without being punished for trusting a dealership. The judge didn't need to teach a lesson. He needed to write numbers on a line and sign his name with a stamp that carries real weight. The part that surprised me was forgiveness. Not the big version with hugs and strings and a soundtrack, but the small practicality of deciding not to carry a grudge that keeps your hands too full to hold anything else. I am not naive. I chose to forgive, but I did not forget. Forgetting would be dangerous. Forgiveness is just me telling myself, I don't want Dylan's mistake to sit in the driver's seat of every holiday meal we ever try to have. A month after the hearing, I got an email from the state dealer board investigator. He wanted to let me know no details, just a courtesy that the dealer had been educated and that their file now included corrective actions. It sounded like a small hammer hitting a big machine. I thanked him. Then I went to my closet and opened the safe just to see the title sitting there like a calm thing. I closed it, spun the dial, and felt the click in my bones. Here is what I wish someone had told me before I learned it the hard way. Your name is only as safe as the room you keep it in. A title isn't a souvenir, it's a key. A registration card is not a refrigerator magnet. It is the next step in a theft if you leave it where anyone can think close enough. If a family member has ever called you dramatic for taking care of your documents, you are probably doing something right. Put the paper in a place that says, "This is mine," even when you are not in the room to say it. And if, despite all your care, you walk out to a quiet driveway one day and feel that sudden wind in your chest, that absence where your car was, do not freeze. Gather the facts you have. Go to the DMV and use verbs: freeze, flag, notarize. File a police report, even if the person who hurt you sits at your table on Sundays. Be kind to the buyer if you can. They didn't pick this storm. Use the right phrases on the dealer, state licensing board, complaint, unwind the sale. Take pictures of everything. Keep copies. Eat something. Sleep if you can. I know this sounds like a lot to ask from people who just wanted to buy a used car and go to work. It is. Adult life is a lot. The good news is that plain habits make great armor. The next time I brought home a document with my name on a line that matters, I didn't put it in the hallway. I put it where my hands know the code and no one else does. I stopped thinking safe means familiar and started thinking it means not available. Maybe this is the part where I'm supposed to end on something heartwarming about brothers. Here's what I have instead. Dylan texted me last week to ask if I could help him with his budget. He used the word help. I sent him a list: rent first, food next, keep gas in the car you bought and paid for yourself, save a little for the thing that always breaks. He texted back a picture of his notebook with a column labeled "No Shortcuts." I don't trust a picture, I trust a practice. But you start somewhere, and a column is better than a shrug. If you've ever been the person who keeps the forms because no one else will, I see you. If you're the person who has been called paranoid because you don't leave passports on a table, I see you too. We are not paranoid. We are the reason surprises don't become disasters. My stepbrother tried to turn my name into cash. A DMV clerk and a stack of ordinary documents pulled my name back into my hands. We didn't need a hero, we needed a process. And a safe, always a safe. In case you need it said plainly, here it is at the end where the advice lives best. Never store original titles, deeds, or wills in a family drawer where anyone can borrow them. Keep them in a safe you control or a bank box, only you can open, and make it a rule that big decisions get signed in front of a neutral witness. Never keep original titles or wills in a family drawer. It's not drama, it's how you keep your life yours. Stay safe.